Hello and welcome to my ESRAD 2023 talk on stage transition from the perspective of constructed development theory. My name is Dr. Darren Stevens. When we look at the existing research on what it means to transition a developmental stage, the answers are often like this meme. I even found this to be true when asking supposed developmental psychologists how they know categorically how their programs grow someone's thinking vertically. Basically, they couldn't tell me. The research essentially offers descriptions of stage transition, bespoke to each framework out there, and mine in that sense is no different, except for the fact that I can support mine with data. If you're familiar with Rumi's elephant analogy, you can see how we're all describing the same thing but from different perspectives. So perhaps the question we should ask is, what is the one thing that unites and separates our thinking on stage transition? In my humble opinion, I think they're all grabbing at this elephant. Stage transition in the literature is so abstract as to be ungraspable. It is really an undefinable illusion. Trying to define it as though it can be reified is a Sisyphean task of Herculean proportions, hyperbole intended. Here is a timeline of developmentalists I found useful. In my humble opinion, again, nothing new was added after LASKE, so I haven't included a couple of people you might notice. I don't see the point of subdividing existing stages and calling it a new thing. It's not. It might have got you a PhD, but it's not as useful as you think when you look at it through the lens of stage transition. In fact, it's even more difficult to determine how we change when the stages are so obviously similar by description. Essentially, in the literature and in development courses run by experts, the clients only ever match described behaviours. So why is it important to understand transition from a new perspective? The concept of stages is somewhat contentious. The question remains whether it is possible to transition from one stage to the next. Traditional research on the movement between stages focuses on two things: transition and transformation. Transition refers to the process of changing from one state, condition, or situation to another. It involves moving from one stage to another while maintaining some continuity between the two. Transformation describes the qualitative difference between orders of consciousness in terms of meaning making and how we move between them, or in terms of Lervinger, from one level of ego development to the next. Transformation refers to a profound and fundamental change in the nature or character of something. It involves a complete overhaul of a system, process, or organisation, resulting in a new way of operating. Well, these claims on the page here, there are many claims by psychologists on what it is to be at a certain stage of development, and the claims are much less profound when we read the literature and understand that the how of stage transition is lacking any detail by the psychologists in question. So what are the mechanisms of change for stage development? You can read the list there. Now, stage development in adults can be influenced by a range of mechanisms of change. Some of the most common mechanisms include social context, which has been a significant contributor to development according to various researchers. The nativist approach attributes development to innate abilities. Language development specifically has been associated with innate abilities. Previous thinking suggests that genetic constitution and experiences drive development. However, genetic constitution alone is insufficient and must be linked to environmental factors. And once merged with Vygotsky's dynamic assessment method, this did prove a more robust measure of development over time, rather than the snapshot method employed previously. However, it still did not break down the specific facets of the developmental process, and their processes involved observation, which suggests a level of experimental input that is susceptible to the observer effect. One way of looking at stage transition is called bridging. Bridging is the process of leaping into the unknown, according to Granite and his pals, and is found within microdevelopment. During bridging, individuals function on two different levels of knowledge simultaneously. In an unfamiliar task, they work on it directly at a low level, which is basically their comfort zone. They also work at a higher level where they construct a bridging shell, albeit still empty of content knowledge. They use this higher level shell to guide their knowledge construction by gradually filling in the shell's unknown component. So what's the problem? Well, it is arguable that bridging using a shell is simply a synonym for personal scaffolding, and given the description above, offers nothing further to the understanding of how a person transitions from one stage to the next. All proffered explanations of what is taking place do not explicitly state the transition, only a description of the bridging process, which is likened to a physical bridge over a motorway. This is the same concern when reading other stage development psychologists in their area of expertise, such as Commons, Jacques and Clement, that kind of thing. What are the criticisms? Well, the empty shell serves as both the bridge and the scaffold, yet the shell is derived from an intention by the actor to achieve these targets, which makes the whole theory circular and self-fulfilling. The phenomenon is paradoxical since this goal-oriented process is guided by an unknown goal, and development is domain-specific. Domain general and specific can coexist, though, according to Arnett. And then age as an indicator of development is problematic. We all know people who have made it to 60 years of age who are still not quite as high level as they could be. And when said goals are set, the ways to reach them, the bridging, is unknown. However, what is known is the intention, and that would be to reach a new goal. So what's missing? A unified theory that underscores the intention in the moment that leads to awareness and choice in a context-specific response. Now, the intention is not discussed behind the transition and how it drives the new strategies. A new strategy would not arise out of old behaviours without a fundamental shift in an individual's awareness of the need to change, and then their intention in the moment. So it should be asked, how does this inform vertical growth? The true subject of developmental research is change. But how do we know what our growth potential is? And how do we map it over time? And how do we know there isn't a level 6? There might be. So we're going to look at an introduction now to constructive development theory created by me in my doctoral research in 2020. So an empirical demonstration of a stage would involve a qualitative difference between one stage and the next. Bridging is a developmental transition mechanism that people use unconsciously across all developmental levels. We've just discussed that. The question we could ask here is, if bridging were undertaken from a position of intention and awareness with a view to choosing to bridge, would the bridge change? This is not obvious in the literature. Bridging allegedly provides one answer to the central question of how more complex structures can be achieved on the basis of less complex ones. We're going to use a different process to get there. A cognitive intention is a shortcut in our thinking. You might be familiar with heuristics as a field of endeavor within psychology, such as tying your shoelace. You no longer have to consciously think about this, yet it gets done almost every day. A single cognitive intention is like a shortcut to your data sorting incoming into your brain. You have habituated the sequence of thinking into a silo of filtered intentions and all out of awareness. It saves you having to remember your unique thinking style in each moment every day, so you act habitually as a result of these cognitive heuristics. Now, essentialism is key. It's a concept contains the essential information necessary to be able to distinguish its instances from its non-instances, which is called essentialism. If we were to focus on a single cognitive intention, we would miss its integration into the larger system and the process of awareness by which the 50 considered cognitive intentions are measured. These are the 50 cognitive intentions. Please pause the slide here if you want to view them properly. And this is the lens through which we look at each cognitive intention. What is your intention? How aware are you of your intention in the moment? What choices does your awareness create? And can you respond differently in the moment? Using KEGAN's ideas and LASKE's ideas, I mapped the 50 cognitive intentions to social, emotional, or cognitive influence. And this is a tool that we use to uncover the hidden cognitive intentions. It's called the Identity Compass and belongs to Arne Maus in Germany. How did I go from those cognitive intentions to KEGAN? By looking at the cumulative results of 8,200 profiles in my studies. I looked at the difference between cognitive intentions to determine what it is meant in real terms for thinking and behaving. So the main principle being someone with this pattern on the screen now behaves in a very different way to someone with the next pattern. And I simply mapped these CI scores to the described behaviors within KEGAN's and LASKE's frameworks. For example, too much external, in this case, and the client will eventually need therapy. So when you combine this principle with the mapping to KEGAN stages, you can see where the choice of thinking behaving comes in. This is essentially a visual of the subject-object principle of KEGAN in cognitive intention form. This person holds both cognitive intentions as objects and can thus choose either in the moment. And this is how I did it. Pause the video here to read the slide. This is KEGAN stage 2. You can see internal being very high. This is KEGAN stage 3. You can see external being very high. Please consider the very different behavioral outputs of just these two cognitive intentions. So I did the same thing for all 50 cognitive intentions, mapping them all to KEGAN's and LASKE's scales. And you can see that the difference in the scores results in a lower KEGAN score, whereas balance results in a higher KEGAN score. Now I did this trying to figure out if balance in cognitive intention pairs is actually a position of choice. So this is what came out of my data. It demonstrates here that quantitatively there is indeed a difference in the use of cognitive intentions at different levels of awareness. It's kind of obvious, but I needed the data to show it. So at the lower levels, the difference is greater, and at the higher levels, they are much more balanced. These produce different ways of thinking. And on the left-hand side, you can see how I mapped my scale quite easily to KEGAN's scale to make it simple. 2.6 is still 2. As I did a factor analysis using these principles, this shows us that we do not grow in the status quo. We need disruption in order to grow our thinking, which is what factors 1 and 3 are telling us, as they map to Piaget's disequilibrium principle. Other theorists are covered in my thesis around this principle, such as Bruner and things like identicide as well. But you can see in dimensions 1 and 3 how the opposing cognitive intentions actually create disequilibrium. And to demonstrate the efficacy from an expectancy perspective, you would expect to see my data mapped to KEGAN's or LASKE's data on population and bell curves, and you can see here that it does. The majority of my people are around TQ3, 3.5, around there. And as we go higher up the scale, the same in the other systems, there are fewer and fewer people. So this is a definition of KEGAN stage 2 based on Cook-Greuter's description. If you were to offer metaphors for growth as per KEGAN's suggestion, then it would be simple to map them to individual cognitive intentions. Therein lies the issue. The metaphors for growth are often all that are offered by way of explanation. I hope you are now seeing how CDT, constructive development theory, does this with verifiable quantitative data and facets of our thinking. And this is KEGAN's stage 3. So I'm sure by now that you've joined the dots. If stage 2 looks like this and stage 3 looks like that, then how do we move someone from 2 to 3 using our knowledge of cognitive heuristics? Easily is the answer. This is how we grow them and the very foundation of this talk. We know from the above graph that the further away the cognitive intention pairs are, the lower the score. So we focus on the lowest cognitive intention in order to improve it, using what I call an intervention. Not an original word, obviously, but in this slide, I would use an intervention to improve the person's use of observer. Over time, their capacity to choose to do it will increase, thus having a profound impact on their overall worldview. Transformational stuff. And this is a wonderful visual of the point. Stage transition isn't a bridge or a shell or a scaffold in the traditional sense. Stage transition is being aware of our intention in the moment. This means that in terms of constructive development theory, our awareness of our intention to change, our thinking, is the bridge. And on a larger scale, it's just pretty. This is what KEGAN's scale would look like using 50 cognitive intentions at each stage. And each one of these will be considered a unique thinking style for each individual. A quick visual, pause the video here if you want to see it for longer. But it's not just KEGAN that it works with. So far, I have successfully mapped my theory to spiral dynamics. So if we want to move someone from the green stage over to the tier 2 stage of yellow, we have the requisite cognitive intention combination to do this categorically, without the need to rely on description and metaphors as support. Get in touch if you would like to know which other systems I have rendered moot by deconstructing their component parts. Ocean and traits take a bit of a battering in some of my other talks. But it's not all about stages. There is no reason to use stages as the de facto measure. It would be equally valid to ask about developmental phases, levels, cycles, layers, seasons, and so on. There is an argument for no stage transition or hierarchy of stages, and it is instead a continual holarchy of growth. With that in mind, the hierarchy of the stages is defined by a variety of psychologists, and as such, there is not one unified explanation, despite them appearing to measure very similar theoretical outputs. You will see this stage-based isomorphism in a few more slides' time. Back to the point, from a coaching perspective, LASKE says you cannot have a client who is a higher stage than their coach, or the relationship is potentially damaging. This is equally true in my theory too. Where CDT and stages work in a coaching relationship is that the higher level coach can have balance in their internal-external cognitive intentions, for example, whereas the client does not. This means that the coach can offer a perspective the client cannot see. It's not does not see, but cannot see. This is like a superpower in coaching terms. The red bit on the slide is what the coach can see and the client cannot. Translate that to the development onion, and the coach is offering a perspective via an intervention that will change how the client sees the world. If we go back to transition and transformation, then each individual cognitive intention change could be considered a transition. However, the cumulative effect of changing 2 or 3 of them will be transformational for the client as their entire worldview changes. And over time, this verifiable and quantitative vertical growth would look like this. The AQ scores you can see at the bottom are my scale, and I will hopefully give you a talk on the awareness quotient at the next ESRAD conference. Where does it fit in? I made this in order to conform to the industry expectations. It's not really appropriate, but offers a framework for understanding where constructive development theory fits in. Do you notice the isomorphism? In other words, we've only ever really looked for stages because we've said that stages exist. So we're always going to find stages. It's not necessarily true. So the timeline of developmental research now looks like this. It's got Stevens on the end there. Tongue in cheek, obviously. Finally, it's not bridges or shells or pulling or pushing or scaffolding. The single most important facet in stage transition is self-awareness. Stage transition equals self-awareness, and self-awareness equals stage transition when looked at it through a cognitive intention lens. And the best part is, it's measurable. Thank you for listening and watching. I hope to see you all again at the next conference. Take care.